The alien delegation convened in a vast chamber aboard their flagship, a cold, calculating species with no taste for frivolity or emotion. Their leaders, tall, angular beings with an expressionless facade, gathered around a central table, its surface gleaming under the sterile light of the ship's interior. On the holographic projection before them, Earth's history unfolded, a timeline of remarkable achievements and, in their minds, perplexing contradictions. The Alien Council had watched humanity for centuries, keeping a distant yet keen eye on Earth. Their findings had been conclusive. Humans were, in the simplest terms, too peaceful. They saw no reason to engage with such a passive species. Unlike others, who thrived on conflict and advanced through battle, humans appeared content to coexist, relying on diplomacy and trade rather than war and conquest. Despite their primitive technology, Earth had avoided the endless wars that seemed to define the trajectory of nearly every other species in the galaxy. "What is the purpose of this species?" asked Zrak, the council's leader, his voice a low hum in the quiet room. "Why do they not grow more? Why do they cling to peace?" "It is their nature," responded Corva, one of the younger council members. "They have not expanded beyond their own planet because they lack the drive to conquer. They hold peace as their highest ideal, yet they struggle to protect it. A species so weak cannot pose a threat. Weakness does not explain their survival," Zrak mused. "They are soft, yes, but they continue to thrive, which is puzzling. Why would a species so peaceful endure this long? Perhaps they are merely waiting for an opportunity to strike." Corva scrolled through another century of Earth's history on the holographic display. Images of human governments signing treaties, images of protests against war, of peacekeepers and diplomats, flashed across the screen. Humanity's history, it seemed, was defined by nonviolence, yet they still existed. And that, more than anything, disturbed the Council. "It is only a matter of time before they fall to greater powers," said Zrak, his tone final. "We should consider their fate inevitable. Let us move on to the next species." But Corva disagreed, a rare occurrence among the usually unyielding Council. "There is something different about them. I do not understand it, but there is an essence here. Perhaps we should send emissaries to observe them more closely." Zrak, ever the pragmatist, eyed Corva with a mixture of curiosity and dismissal. "Emissaries? For what?" "To witness their rituals of peace and their inability to protect themselves from their own nature." "Not just that," Corva insisted. "I believe there is more. What if their peace is not weakness, but an extreme form of restraint? A deep-seated strength that only comes into play under the most severe of circumstances." Zrak paused. The idea was unpalatable, yet intriguing. Humanity was so different from the battle-hardened species that populated the galaxy. Perhaps they were not as vulnerable as they appeared. The Council's verdict had been based on observation, but it had never been tested in combat. What if there was something they had missed? The decision was made quickly after that, as decisions often were in the Council. The emissaries would be sent. A small, covert unit would travel to Earth under the guise of peacekeepers, tasked with learning more about these humans. Their first mission was simple: confirm whether humanity truly was as harmless as it seemed. On Earth, the tensions that had simmered for decades reached a boiling point. What had once been a planet of peaceful alliances and progressive ideals was now a world teetering on the edge of chaos. It had started small, a border dispute here, a political assassination there, but soon, old wounds festered, and the world's great powers were locked in conflict. What the Council of Aliens had failed to understand was that humanity's commitment to peace had not been a sign of weakness, but rather of restraint. It was a conflict no one had anticipated. Nations turned against each other, alliances broke apart, and resources dwindled. Amid the chaos, a new figure emerged, a leader whose charisma and ruthlessness began to unite fractured factions. His name was Alexander Kane, a former diplomat turned general, and he understood one thing that had eluded most of humanity. Sometimes, peace could only be preserved through war. The world watched as the man's forces swept across Europe, launching precision strikes against those who dared to challenge him. His methods were controversial, brutal at times, but effective. He wasn't fighting for conquest or revenge. He was fighting to ensure humanity's survival. But there was more to Kane's tactics than simple survival. He had a vision of humanity as a force to be reckoned with, a species capable of standing firm against any threat, whether from within or beyond the stars. Kane's rise did not go unnoticed. The alien emissaries, observing from their cloaked ship orbiting the planet, saw the shifting tides. At first, they dismissed it as just another instance of human folly, another leader vying for power in a dying world. But as his armies advanced with terrifying efficiency, the emissaries began to feel the stirrings of unease. The humans, they realized, were not simply reacting to crisis. They were adapting, evolving, finding ways to fight that the Council had not anticipated. The emissaries watched as humans, despite their relatively primitive technology, displayed a resilience that even the most advanced species in the galaxy had trouble comprehending. What they had perceived as weakness, human hesitation to embrace violence, was in fact a carefully considered approach, an approach born out of centuries of experience in balancing peace and war. And now, the humans were preparing for something far more devastating, a war that would ensure their place in the cosmos. The aliens had made one fatal mistake. They had underestimated humanity's capacity for survival. The emissaries, once so certain of the species' pacifism, now saw a glimpse of something far more dangerous, a species willing to fight for its future, no matter the cost. But the question remained, would humanity's fighting spirit be enough to turn the tide, or would it be crushed beneath the weight of alien might? For the first time, the aliens questioned their initial conclusions, and for the first time, they feared the consequences of their underestimation. The war had escalated beyond anyone's expectations, including those of the alien emissaries observing Earth from their hidden vantage point. What had begun as a local conflict in one of the many disputed territories had grown into a global inferno. Alexander Kane, the enigmatic leader who had once championed diplomacy, now commanded legions of soldiers with unparalleled precision. His strategies, born from a deep understanding of human nature, focused not just on victory, but on survival, and on the unwavering conviction that humanity's place in the galaxy was worth fighting for. Kane was a man of contradictions. A former diplomat with a background in international negotiations, he had long understood the power of words. But as the world teetered on the edge of annihilation, he realized that diplomacy, for all its strengths, was no match for the primal forces of violence and desperation. It was war, and only war, that would shape humanity's future. The alien emissaries, still hovering in their cloaked ships, could not comprehend what they were witnessing. In the ruined remains of a once proud European capital, Kane surveyed the battlefield. His army had just retaken a key city that had fallen into enemy hands weeks earlier, but it was no easy victory. The streets were littered with the wreckage of combat, burned-out tanks, shattered glass, the twisted remains of once vibrant neighborhoods reduced to rubble. Yet despite the carnage, Kane's soldiers were not disheartened. They had grown used to hardship, to the ferocity of their enemies, and to the ever-present uncertainty of war. General Kane, a voice called from behind him. A young officer, Lieutenant Sarah Collins, approached with a report in her hand, her face drawn from days of sleepless vigilance. "Talk to me, Sarah," Kane said without turning to face her. "The enemy forces are regrouping outside the city limits," she said, her voice steady despite the tension that surrounded them. "They'll hit us again within the next 12 hours. We'll need to fortify the defenses if we're to hold this ground." Kane nodded slowly, weighing his options. He had learned the hard way that every decision in this war came with consequences, and sometimes those consequences were brutal. But there was no turning back now. The mission was clear: hold this city at all costs, for it was a symbol, one that the world would be watching. If humanity faltered here, they would falter everywhere. "Prepare the soldiers," Kane said firmly. "We don't run. We fight. Tell them to dig in, reinforce the lines. We'll make our stand here." As Collins hurried off to relay the orders, Kane stood alone for a moment, watching the distant horizon. His mind wandered back to the early days of the war, when he had hoped that humanity's capacity for peace would see them through. He had once believed that the world could still be saved by diplomacy, by finding common ground. But now, the idealism of his youth seemed as distant as the stars above. The truth had become clear. Humanity's future depended not on compromise, but on an iron will to survive and to fight when all else failed. Meanwhile, the alien emissaries continued their observations from the safety of their cloaked vessel. They had expected the humans to falter, to submit, as they had so often in their history. Yet, with each passing day, their initial predictions became more and more difficult to reconcile with what they were witnessing. The humans fought with an intensity and creativity that left the emissaries struggling to adapt. One of the emissaries, Zorak, was growing increasingly uneasy. A tactician by nature, he had studied many species throughout the galaxy, but humanity's approach to combat was unlike anything he had encountered. The humans did not rely on sheer strength or superior technology. Instead, they fought with a ruthless ingenuity, improvising at every turn. They used the terrain to their advantage, blending their weapons with their environment, and applying psychological tactics that confused and disoriented their enemies. It was a brutal, almost primal form of warfare, but it was effective. "We must revise our assumptions," Zorak muttered to his fellow emissary, Korva, as they monitored the conflict from the shadows. "These humans, they adapt too quickly. They've created something we did not anticipate." Korva, usually the more pragmatic of the two, frowned as he watched another of Kane's tactical strikes unfold. "We underestimated them. The human spirit is more resilient than we thought. What was once perceived as their weakness, their avoidance of conflict, now seems to be their greatest strength." Zorak's thoughts raced. Humanity had shown no signs of a natural predilection for war, and yet here they were, engaging in battle with a ferocity that shook the very foundation of their earlier assessment. Kane, it seemed, was more than just a leader. He was a catalyst, awakening something deep within his people that no one had expected. The battle for the city grew more intense as the hours passed. Kane's forces had dug in, reinforcing their position and bracing for the enemy's counteroffensive. The sounds of artillery fire reverberated through the air, and the ground shook as explosions rocked the city's outskirts. But it was not the sheer scale of the destruction that struck Kane most. It was the determination in his soldiers' eyes. Each soldier was a testament to the human spirit, worn, battered, but unyielding. They fought not for glory, but for survival. Each one of them had a family, a loved one, a reason to stand firm against the enemy's relentless assault. And in that moment, as the battlefield became a nightmare of fire and smoke, Kane realized that humanity's true strength lay not in its weapons, but in the will to protect what mattered most. "General, they're here," Collins said, breaking him from his thoughts. The enemy had arrived, their forces in full assault, and Kane knew that this would be the final test. There was no retreat, no fallback. The time for negotiations had passed. It was now or never. He turned to face his troops, his voice ringing out over the chaos. "Today we show them who we are. Stand your ground. This is our home. We fight to the last breath." And so they did. The humans fought with an intensity that surprised even their alien watchers, holding their position with a combination of tactical brilliance, fierce resolve, and a raw, unrelenting desire to survive. From above, Zorak watched as Kane's forces held firm. The aliens had expected the humans to falter, but what they saw was something far different. The emissaries had come to observe weakness, but instead, they had witnessed humanity's unshakable strength. The alien emissaries had seen enough. What they had anticipated as a minor skirmish had turned into a global conflict, and the humans, far from crumbling under the weight of their struggles, were adapting, evolving, and fighting with an ingenuity that defied their expectations. From the safety of their cloaked ships, Zorak and Korva watched as the humans, driven by an instinct they had never fully understood, held their ground with unyielding resolve. The brutal war for Earth had not broken their spirit. It had ignited it. "What are we witnessing?" Zorak muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. He stared at the unfolding battle below, where Kane's forces were fighting tooth and nail to retain control of the capital city. These humans, they fight not just with their weapons, but with everything they are. Corva, still in shock from the ferocity of human ingenuity, nodded slowly. They do not surrender, not even when faced with overwhelming odds. Their tactics are unlike anything we've encountered. It is as though they are reborn in the fire of war. Zorak's mind raced. For the first time, he questioned the conclusions the council had drawn. In the sterile, logical world of the aliens, peace had always been the natural order. War was a necessary evil, a tool to be wielded when diplomacy failed. But the humans, what were they? At first, they had appeared so peaceful, so fragile. Their history a tapestry of treaties and compromises. But now, in the brutal chaos of war, they revealed a different side, a side that no one had seen coming. Their strength wasn't in their technology, which was inferior to the advanced weapons of the galaxy's other species. No, their strength was in something far more profound, their resilience. As the battle raged below, Zorak felt a surge of frustration. They had come here expecting to find a species weak and vulnerable, easy to conquer. Instead, they found a species that would never surrender. It was infuriating, and it was terrifying. On the ground, Kane's resolve was beginning to show its cracks. The battle for the city was becoming increasingly desperate. Despite his tactical brilliance and his soldiers' unmatched courage, the enemy was relentless. Their numbers were growing, and their weapons were devastating. Kane knew this was the moment that would decide the fate of humanity. Either they would win and show the universe their strength, or they would fall and let Earth slip into the hands of those who could not understand what it meant to fight for survival. He stood at the front lines, his face grim but determined, issuing orders to his commanders, making decisions that would cost lives but ensure victory. "General Kane," Lieutenant Collins called out from behind, her voice barely audible over the thunder of artillery. "We got incoming, heavier bombardment than we've ever seen. We can't hold this position for much longer." Kane's gaze hardened. "We don't give up," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the chaos. "We push back. We adapt." That's what they don't understand. As the artillery shells rained down upon them, Kane's forces dug deeper, using every bit of the city's infrastructure to their advantage. The humans fought like cornered animals, unwilling to back down even in the face of total destruction. Kane saw it in their eyes, an unbreakable will to survive. They were all in this together, and they would fight until the last breath. Meanwhile, the alien emissaries had seen enough. Zorak and Corva had underestimated humanity, and now they were beginning to question their entire understanding of the species. They had watched countless civilizations rise and fall, and never before had they encountered one like this. One so capable of embracing both peace and violence, of balancing the scales of diplomacy with the fire of war. What if we have misjudged them? Corva finally spoke, his voice uncertain. The doubt was new to him, unsettling. What if they are not simply a species of peace, but one that understands the cost of conflict? What if their restraint in the past was not weakness, but an understanding that war is the last resort? Zorak's mind churned. The Council's verdict had been absolute. Humanity was harmless, peaceful, and would never pose a threat. But as he watched the humans fight, as he watched Kane lead his people through the inferno, something inside him shifted. Could it be true? Were the humans not just a fluke, an anomaly among the peaceful species of the galaxy? Were they actually capable of becoming something far more dangerous, something that would not hesitate to defend themselves, even in the face of annihilation? Below, the humans fought with everything they had, and the enemy forces, while technologically superior, found themselves pushed to the brink. The battlefield was a storm of chaos. Yet in the eye of that storm, Kane stood unwavering, his presence a beacon to his troops. "This is it," he said, turning to Collins as he watched the tide of battle begin to shift. "This is where we show them what we're made of. We hold this line, no matter what." With that, he led his soldiers in a final, decisive push. Against all odds, they broke through the enemy lines, pushing the invaders back, reclaiming their city, and making their stand for Earth's survival. The battlefield became a monument to humanity's indomitable will, a reminder that the species would fight to the end, no matter the cost. Above, the alien emissaries watched in silence. The fight was over, but the implications of what they had witnessed were only just beginning to sink in. Humanity had done the unthinkable. They had proven themselves capable of both peace and war, and they had done so with an intensity that left the emissaries stunned. I do not understand, Zorak whispered, his voice filled with awe. This is not the species we thought we knew. They are not simply peaceful. They are something more. They will not bend. They will not break. Corva nodded slowly, his mind racing. Perhaps we have underestimated them. Perhaps the greatest strength of the humans is not in their technology, but in their ability to fight for something greater, something we cannot fully comprehend. For the first time since their arrival, Zorak felt a deep respect for humanity, a species that had defied their expectations, a species that had shown that even in the face of total destruction, there was still the will to rise, to fight, and to survive. It was only then, as they hovered silently above Earth, that the emissaries fully grasped the truth. Humanity was not a species to be conquered. Humanity was a species that, when pushed to the brink, would not only fight to defend their world, they would change the universe itself in the process. And they had just begun.